Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for So You Want to Be a GC, a Legal Mentor Network, and Latitude Legal collaboration. I'm Amy Goldstein, board member and chair of training programs for the Legal Mentor Network. I'm also a founder of Grace & Allen, a recruiting and career coaching firm for attorneys. For those of you who might not be familiar with the Legal Mentor Network, we are a nonprofit organization focused on providing free legal mentoring to law students and junior attorneys. You can learn more about the organization and how to sign up at our website, legalmentornetwork.org. Feel free to put questions in the Q&A as we go along. If it fits, we might get to it during the conversation. Otherwise, there will be time afterwards for your questions to be addressed. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to our moderator, Kyle Robish.
Hey everyone, I'm Kyle Robish. I'm a partner with Latitude. We are a flex legal talent company. Before that, I was a commercial litigation partner at a large law firm and a associate and even larger law firm in DC. But what I have not done is been in-house, and that's why I'm really excited to host this panel, because I work with a lot of in-house lawyers in this role and a lot of people who want to move in-house. We have an awesome panel of 3 folks who have been in-house, and for each of which have had a very different path to getting to where they are today and where they've been. And so today we're going to have a little informal conversation about how to get from wherever you are to getting to the GCC, whether that's a law firm attorney looking to go in-house, a law student looking to eventually go in-house, or someone who's already in-house and just wants to eventually become the CLO or the GC where they work or somewhere else. And so we're going to kick it off by introducing our panel. I'm going to ask each panelist to give us a little bit of color on who they are, what they've done in their career, and one thing they wish they knew before becoming a GC. And because I work with George, I'm allowed to pick on him, and I'm going to start with George.
Thanks, Kyle. So currently, I'll start with where I am now, just to get that out of the way. But I work with Kyle. I'm the director of legal placement and recruiting for Latitude. My road here was an interesting one. I started out of law school at a large firm in Central Florida. From there, I had an opportunity to jump in-house with a client of ours, and it was mostly for personal reasons. And from there, then I had an opportunity to work with a large hotel company based out of Spain. And then that kind of catapulted me to associate general counsel at Wyndham Vacation Ownership, now Travel and Leisure. And then from there, became general counsel for Blue Green Vacations. And from there, after that, they got sold to Hilton, and I decided to take a break and come work with Kyle. And that's kind of my path and a little bit of my background.
George, you got to tell us one thing you wish you knew before you became GC.
So one thing, I think the interesting thing is that I had to be more of a salesperson than I thought I would have had to have been in that seat. Meaning I had to convince some of my peers. It was great in terms of the legal knowledge, but you also have to be persuasive in your positions and also how you present. I think your either solutions or some of the potential challenges that the company faces, and there's a way to do that and a way not to do that. And I learned that, I guess, by making some mistakes along the way, but certainly figured I needed to be more persuasive and more of a salesperson than I expected to have to be.
Rashma, I'm going to kick it to you next to tell us about yourself, your background, how you got to where you are, and one thing you wish you knew before you got to where you are.
All right. So my name is Rashma Ryan. I'm currently general counsel at a consulting company called Advocates for Human Potential. We are at the intersection of behavioral health and government contracting. My background and my path to GC is a little bit non-traditional. So I started out my career out of law school in what is now known as legal operations. So I started in a consulting firm, and that was my first insight into the legal operations world, which is essentially the business side of law. So what you're doing is you're managing budgets, creating processes, and I have managed several different projects under the legal operations hat, starting off with settlements and moving on to mergers and acquisitions. I did also a little bit of kind of legal technology project management. So my background is, again, mostly in legal operations. And at the current company that I'm at now, I created the first legal operations department, and then opportunity opened up for me to step into the general counsel role. And I took that opportunity, and it's been great so far. One thing I wish I knew before stepping into the role is you don't need to have all of the answers. I think there's often this misconception that the general counsel knows everything about every legal area that exists, and that is just not true. You have to know enough to just have good judgment and recognize that something is a risk and be able to flag that early for the business. And I know that was very overwhelming for me when I started, because I had that misconception that I had to know everything and have all the answers. And it's okay to say you don't know, and, you know, bring in the right experts to help answer the questions.
Steve, last but not least.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate you including me. So I, like Rushma, very untraditional path. So I've gone back and forth between law and business, and still do that now for my company. So I started at law firms, went in-house, then left the law to be the general manager of a couple of manufacturing plants, back to a job, a GC job at a small public company in the same industry. Then left that industry, different manufacturing industry, and became a sales manager, and then a CFO at that company. Left there to be a part owner of a plastics manufacturing company, became COO and then CEO, and left there to join the company I'm with now. So at Valera, the company I'm at, I'm the head of risk and GC. In my 20 years there, I've done the legal stuff ever since I began as the first attorney. But over the years, I've managed HR, finance, vendor management, facilities, process improvements, M&A, and now lead risk and legal.
And what's one thing, Steve, you wish you knew before you became GC?
Yes. So it actually dovetails heavily on what George said and a little bit on what Rushma said too. I think it's how important relationships are, that ultimately we're experts in some areas, as Rushma pointed out, not in every area, but we kind of have a good feel for questions to ask and things to address. But as important, or ultimately maybe more important, is the relationships we have with the C-suite, with our peers, with our team, with others in our organizations or our industry. So just how critical relationships are to being a successful attorney.
Well, and one thing I took away from all three of your answers sort of combined is there's no one path to get to GC, or really any role, I think, in our field. You don't have to check certain boxes or go a certain way. You can go in and out, Steve, as you have, right, of the law, in and out of business and the law and back, have roles that do both. You can go legal operations like Rushma all the way to GC. You can go from a law firm like George did to start somewhere at the bottom rung of in-house life and move your way up. But to me, the theme is there's a lot of different ways to get to that same place. And so I think, and I suspect we'll talk about this today later, but leaning into that has probably made all three of you better at your current role and open up doors and skill sets in ways that you didn't anticipate at the beginning of your career. So I will kick it to our first question, which is, when did you know you wanted to become a GC, and how did that evolution happen? And I will start with Rushma this time.
Sure. So I always knew that I wanted to operate at an executive level. That had always been a goal of mine. going into law school, but I didn't necessarily see myself as general counsel. You know, as I mentioned in my first answer, my background is in legal operations, and I really love the operation side of things and the business side of things. However, at my current company, I just stayed open to opportunity, and I was approached about potentially stepping into the general counsel role. And it was only when I was approached about it did I start to give serious thought about to it. And I did some learning into, you know, what exactly is the general counsel role and how can I make that role into something that I have seen myself in. And that's kind of what I did here. So I'm general counsel for Advocates for Human Potential. And while I do perform the general counsel functions, I have the option to kind of choose, you know, what I outsource, how I bring in different experts to help me be successful in my role. But to answer your question, I didn't really know that I wanted to be general counsel until someone approached me about it, and I put some thought into it, and I got there by just staying open to opportunity. I think if you are just curious about, you know, what you can do to help your organization, or even peers that you meet, you may see some opportunities open up that you didn't envision for yourself when you first started.
Reshma, before I go to George, I want to, click a little bit into something you said, which is, making the role what you kind of envisioned it could be, or putting your own fingerprints on the role. Has it surprised you how much of the role of general counsel is not lawyering, is operational, is persuasion, is sort of, getting business team buy-in, or was that something you already kind of realized?
No, I did not realize that before I stepped into the role. And I think that is the one thing that deterred me from stepping into it, because I was very afraid of not knowing enough from the legal side before I stepped into the role. But once you're in it, you realize that, to your point, it's much more about building relationships, persuading stakeholders, identifying risk, and then, you know, bringing in the experts to help you do the legal analysis. Because as GC, you're more of a strategic thinker than you are in the weeds doing the day-to-day work. You sometimes, not always, have a team that helps you do that, or you're working with outside experts.
George, I want to kick it to you, and for that question, which as a reminder is, when did you decide that you wanted to become GC, or know that you wanted to become a GC, and how did that evolution happen? And I guess for you, the backdrop is you had more of the, I think, I would describe traditional path, right? Where you were at a law firm for a little while, and then you started off as a sort of corporate counsel, or the bottom of the rung, and then kind of worked your way up.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I chose to leave the law firm at around 4.5 years or so, which is kind of where you transition, your goal ultimately is partner. And I thought, and as I mentioned earlier, I left for personal reasons. Not that I had a master plan, and certainly not a master plan to become GC, but I almost felt that in a sense I was walking away from, my long-term plan in law by going in-house. Even though I kind of knew, I had a business background, I think, going into law school. Even though I knew that I wanted to go in-house, I almost felt that by leaving the partner track in a firm, I was kind of giving up kind of success. And I think that was probably a huge misconception on my part. I did leave to a smaller company. It was a smaller development company. But as Reshma said, you just take those opportunities when they present themselves, and you've got the fork in the road, and you've got to make a decision. And in this case, there was no guarantee, and certainly it was completely up to me in terms of what I made of that opportunity. But I decided to do it and kind of begin all over in an in-house setting, because eventually I felt that was going to be better for me personally. Now, once I did it, I kind of I had some mentors that basically said, never worry about the opportunities and the money, just work hard, and both will come. And I kind of put blinders on and I said, all right, well, I'm just going to take this opportunity. I'm going to go in-house and I'm going to make the best of that role as I can. And luckily for me, it was a very small legal department. So I was working directly with the CLO and the CEO at that point. And that opportunity kind of set me up, I guess, for what became a huge opportunity like 2 years, 3 years down the road, which was to help lead an entire legal department, create and lead a legal department for the Spanish International Hotel brand. And they took a chance on me. And at the same time, it was another opportunity. Back to Reshma's point, I think you just take those opportunities, and it was another big kind of fork in the road. And that one really became, I think, the stepping stone towards leading a legal department.
Steve, I'm going to go to you next for when did you know you wanted to become a GC and how did the evolution happen? And I'm going to fold in really quickly, if I can, a question we have here from the audience, which is there a cutoff age in your experience to becoming GC, either too early or is there too late in the game?
Okay, I'll take those in order. So first, I wasn't sure that I wanted to be a GC. I knew I wanted to have a role in business. And so as you could tell by my career path, I wanted to learn and experience different things in law and business, and ultimately realize that the GC role can be a great blend of law and business. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to do that at my company and add in things beyond the traditional general counsel purview items. So ultimately, I've landed on it as the career path for me because of that ability to be a business person who happens to have a law degree. So where you're contributing at the company, not just from a legal and risk standpoint, but strategically and in other ways, as a key executive at the company. In terms of that audience question, I would say, as a practical matter, you've got to have some experience, I think, probably to be a GC, except maybe some tiny startup where for them, they're happy to have somebody sort of who fits a certain profile. But at the typical company, they've got some major issue or opportunity that they deal with, whether it's litigation, transactional, whatever it might be, that ultimately they want somebody who's got some experience in that area. But I think it could be as low as 2 or 4 years experience. It doesn't have to be 10 or 15 years, whatever. And then on the other end, I mean, I know people that have become general counsel when they're 65 or 70. So I don't know that there's a hard and fast bookend at the maximum age.
Steve, before we go to the next question for everybody, I wanted to drill down on something you mentioned in the introduction and again a second ago, which is, your career has had a lot of bouncing between, traditional like law firm work to start, in-house work, pure business work where there's no your legal work might have informed the role, but that was not the role. Back now to being a GC. Do you think that all of those sort of twists and turns in your career path have made you a better GC now? That's the first part of my question. And I'm going to give you another second part, which is how did you end up or decide you want to be back in the GC role after being in pure business roles and in the C-suite?
The first one's an easy answer, 110%. So the experiences that I've had in business and the things I've learned have absolutely been helpful. And my peers at my company have told me that take my sales experience, for example, that as I've worked with them, they see things from me that they don't typically see from an attorney, and they recognize that I've got more information than the typical attorney about sales because I've had to do it and call on clients and try to actually sell things to them. So that one, absolutely, it's definitely been helpful. Um, the other one, what was the other one again?
What made you decide after being outside of the law for a little
Back to
bit to go back into the GCC?
So the honest answer is the role I had right before my GC role was the toughest one I've had in my career, being the CEO of a small manufacturing company. And it was a partner and I bought the company right before a recession started. And we had to downsize from 125 employees to 65 employees. Our sales shrunk by almost 50%. So it was extremely stressful to make payroll and bring the company back. We were able to bring the company back, but I said life's too short. I need something. So believe it or not, being a general counsel was less stressful than that. So I mean that's a little tongue in cheek because at the company I joined, I talked to the CEO about my experience and what I was looking for and the kind of role that was a combination of law and business. And it worked out well because he was actually hiring his first in-house attorney and was concerned that he'd hire somebody who didn't have a business mindset. So it worked out really well that he brought me in to be that kind of general counsel, which is a big part of what attracted me.
Reshma, I want to start the next question with you, which is what separates a good law firm lawyer from a good GC? And we can think about that, I think, from kind of two backgrounds or lenses, right? One is, the work you do at a law firm versus the work you do in house. And then now having been a GC and looking at your outside counsel and your law firms, what makes them deliver the best advice? What creates the best outside lawyer?
So I think the difference between a good lawyer and a good GC, well, as a GC, you're on top of every issue that's coming in. And when you hire an expert outside of your company, they're in the weeds, doing the legal analysis, the risk analysis, getting you all of the information that you need. So when you're at a law firm, you're performing that function where you are the expert in that area. And then as a general counsel, you don't have the luxury of researching the issues yourself and coming to a conclusion. You have to pull yourself out of the weeds and rely on those folks that you're hiring to help lead you in the right direction. And again, you're a strategic advisor. You need to convince the business to move in the direction that your technical lawyer has advised you on. And that is sometimes a little bit more difficult than just knowing the law and being able to articulate that to the general counsel or your client. Because as we all know, it's just difficult to convince stakeholders of things sometimes, especially when they have in their mind that they want something done a very specific way, and then legal comes in and saying, well, that may be illegal, so we can't do it that way. Here are some other ways to do it. And as general counsel, you kind of have to get to yes. A good general counsel enables the business. They're not a barrier to getting things done. And not that law firm lawyers are, but I think you're definitely trusted more as an advisor if you can get the business to yes. By leveraging your outside experts or the law firm lawyers that you hire.
Sounds like there's a lot of getting comfortable, acting on imperfect information without everything kind of laid out. And then with that, then having to turn around and work with the business team to make it happen, right? Not just, okay, here is the law, I'm wiping my hands of that decision. Instead, you're saying, here is sort of the bounds of what we can do. Here's where I think we should go, and here's why. How can I help us get there? How can you, what can I do to help you get there?
Right. Right. And I often get asked the question, what's the risk if we don't do this? Because a lot of times the operations of implementing something that legal advise on is a big hurdle for them. So they want to know how can we do this in the most simplest, easiest way? So being able to articulate that, I think, is just very helpful for them.
Steve, what about you as someone who's been in business, pure business roles, in the GC role, and in a law firm to start your career? What in your mind separates the good law firm lawyer from a great GC?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rushma really hit on it. I think what's interesting is what's common. So good communication is common. It's different communication when you're in a business versus at a law firm. But whatever the communication is, it's important to be good at it. So that's sort of commonality. Relationships that we've talked about on the call a bit, really critical as a GC. The relationship is different if it's an outside counsel, but still sort of important that they understand your role, your needs, the company needs, that whatever information you're getting from them is customized for your particular situation. And then beyond that, I think the differences Rushma talked about are definitely important. I mean, kind of at the extremes to sort of think about it, as a GC, you've got to be an inch deep and a mile wide. At a law firm, you're an inch wide and a mile deep. So it's at its core sort of a very different role. But ultimately they've got to come together and work well together through that communication and strong relationships.
George, what would you add, if anything, there?
Yeah, I'll just follow up real quick what Steve and Reshma are saying. I think as a GC, you're wearing two hats. You're wearing a business hat and a lawyer hat, and you've got to figure out how to marry the two. And I think you've got to have great law firm partners to help you with the analysis, because you're first and foremost, your job is basically to protect the company. So I think you have great outside partners that need to give you and distill all of the information so that you can take that information. And certainly you can't just regurgitate that back to your C-suite or even to the business. You've got to convert that into business speak and apply that to the business operation, and then figure out if it's going to work or not. And if it doesn't work, then as Reshma said, then you've got to find the alternatives and consider your risk tolerance, the company risk tolerance, and other alternatives, and be prepared to share those with with your business partners.
So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about something that I think sometimes might get lost when people think about being GC, which is, you think about working with the business, you think about being the sort of final stop in legal, but a big part of the role, especially at a larger company, but even at small ones, is separate from business, separate from law, is leadership. You're leading a team, right? A team of, might just be one, might just be a paralegal, it might just be another lawyer you work with, or it could be a team of 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 people. And that's a huge function. And at least in my experience, that's not something you typically get formal training on in the law firm setting and oftentimes in-house. So what would you say, Steve, I'll start with you this time, is the hardest thing about going from lawyering to becoming a leader of lawyers in that GC role?
Good question. The hardest thing in leading people. So I've led people in different kind of roles, GC, but also others. And it's interesting how many things are common in leading people, whether you're leading lawyers or legal ops people versus salespeople, CFO, plant operations people. There's a lot of commonality. I would say really making sure that it's, I think, pretty easy at times to get focused on the legal work itself. There's either exciting work or critical work for the company. There's things that the C-suite are asking about, so that's getting a lot of attention. And so at times it's pretty easy to spend a huge amount of time on the most important legal work going on within the legal department, and talking to the attorneys working on that and making sure you're up to speed and are there roadblocks. But it's just critical to not get distracted from the fact that you are the strategic leader for the group, you're the people leader for the group, And the things you do in those kind of roles are different than you do when you've got your legal hat on, looking at legal issues or reviewing a contract or whatever it might be. So I think the takeaway is, as GC, it's absolutely critical to take the time on a frequent basis to step back from the legal work and think about the people side, the technology side, the ops side of running a legal department.
Before I go to Reshma to pick that up, I want to ask Steve, what do you have a North Star or a guiding principle when it comes to your leadership style? Something that over the course of your career you've picked up on as being critical to being an effective leader in addition to being a GC?
I wouldn't say there's a North Star. I think it's probably more like looking in the sky with a whole bunch of different little stars there, little things or medium-sized things to do to kind of stay on track as a leader. Um, and part of it revolves around personal development. I think it's important for GCs and frankly everybody in legal departments or at law firms to regularly be thinking about their personal development. So no North Star, Kyle. I wish I had one. I would share it with everybody. It's accumulating, things that work for you along the way.
Reshma, I'll kick it to you for both of those things, whichever resonates with you more or both.
So I'll start with, going from being a lawyer to managing lawyers. And I think my experience has been a little different, where I was in a position before where I was managing operations folks, and then shifted to managing operations and managing attorneys. And in legal operations, you do find a lot of individuals that don't necessarily have a law degree or are attorneys. Sometimes you have paralegals that are in operations role, or sometimes no law degree or paralegal certification. So it was easier for me to manage a group of operations folks, being the attorney leading them, because I was allowed to be a perfectionist in the way that I wanted operations to flow. But when you go to managing attorneys, I think you need to take a step back and allow them to perform their best work, because oftentimes they know more about the subject matter than you do. So it was, what I had to do was kind of transitioning to letting people take ownership. So I would just set the vision and let them decide how it plays out, versus kind of dictating how I wanted things to go every step of the way. So it was important for me to, step back and let other people define operations or manage how a specific contract negotiation would go. I was there to provide oversight, and if they needed help, they could reach out. But I think the biggest challenge was stepping back and not being able to do everything myself, or having that control in the same way that I did before.
George, I'm going to end with you there. What, in your experience, is the hardest thing about going from being a lawyer, whether they're at a law firm or more junior in-house, to becoming a leader of lawyers while also having a lawyer to some degree?
And I think all of us have experienced, lawyers and management sometimes just are diametrically opposed. They don't, just because you're a smart lawyer or a good lawyer doesn't make you necessarily a good manager. And I've seen, I think one of the biggest challenges to someone walking into a GC or even an in-house role, one of the big challenges and probably one of the top reasons for failure is lack of awareness in terms of either your management style or the way you're coming across as a team member, or just in general your attitude. And I think Steve said it in terms of personal development. I think management is something I had to learn in my first role, managing and creating and growing a legal department. I basically had the learning curve and I had to make, I made my mistakes. But the good thing is there's a lot of development books about management out there. So I think awareness is key there. Be self-aware and take feedback as often and as much as you can get from all levels, from people under you, from peers, and also managers, and take that to heart and try to do something about it if there's some sort of weakness within your skill set. And I think the rest is just being, I adhere to, letting my people do their thing. There's going to be a lot of smart or smarter lawyers working for you when you get to the GC seat. And I think you've got to be aware of letting people do their thing, and actually, it takes a team to be successful, not a person, and a title doesn't really necessarily ensure success. So, I'd say just be self-aware is my number one advice there.
We have a question that I think dovetails with a kind of closing thought I wanted to tee up for you all before opening up for more general Q&A. The question is there anything you wish you'd done differently in your path to this role? And the closing thought I had, and I'll let you guys either answer one or both, is what is one thing junior lawyers can do today to make themselves GC ready down the line? So the question is, looking back, what do you wish you'd done differently? Or, putting yourself back in that seat a long time ago, looking forward, what is something that you did or you wish you had done that would, give you the keys to success for today? And I will pick on George to give us that thought there.
I think if you're in a law firm, I think the number one thing is become a trusted advisor to clients if you can. Take every opportunity you can to advise and help and work directly with clients. I think that will expose you to the business side of whatever issue you're on, and then potentially have those discussions with the client about the business and how did you decide this, or what did you do with my advice and how did you apply it to the business. And the more information and the more you can put yourself in that scenario, the easier it's going to be once you do land an in-house role. And then if you're in-house, just be open to any opportunity. Back to the point of just being available to take on. I had a lot of young lawyers. I had one in particular that was very open to doing different things. Started as a litigator, did compliance, did marketing and advertising. So by the time, I think 4 or 5 years had passed, he had pretty much done almost everything within the department. And he became just naturally kind of the number two, potential successor to the GC role, just in a sense, because he had exposed himself to every area of the business.
Steve, what would you add?
I could come up with something to add, but George just hit on, to me, the two top things: client advisor and taking on new challenges, get out of your comfort zone, stretch yourself, learn. It's the way to grow as a person, as a lawyer, ultimately to be in a position as a GC to tackle new challenges. And the client advisor part is so important to make that connection, those relationships, learn what makes clients tick, so that you know the other side when you become a client one day. So to me, those are the most important. The one thing in terms of my career path, for the last 20 years, I've been in the same industry, and it's really helped me deepen relationships in the industry. I'm on industry committees and doing things that I really enjoy. So if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't have bounced around industries earlier in my career. I would have tried to stay in an industry to develop those sort of long-term connections and the opportunities that come with those.
Rashma.
I think I'm just gonna put some emphasis on taking ownership and staying open to opportunities and being proactive. Because I think throughout my career, that is the one thing that has stayed constant, no matter what role I was in, whether that was in a consulting firm, in a law firm, or in-house, or even while I was interning in law school, I stayed open to opportunities. I probably did about 6 different internships across very random practice areas. And even throughout my career, it was just identifying different areas and being proactive and taking ownership, right? Being curious about the business and wanting to learn more, and, you know, raising your hand to volunteer for something that maybe seems a little uncomfortable at first. But just getting yourself out there and being proactive and building relationships, I think is the most important thing, whether it's becoming a GC or another executive role that you're looking for. And I don't know, it's hard for me to say if I would do anything different, because I am very grateful for where I have landed and the opportunities that have presented themselves to me. And uh, to me, it was just by staying open to opportunity. Maybe I'll have a different answer in a couple years from now, but right now, there's not much that I would do different.
That's a good place to be. I don't have anything else for you all, so we have some time for Q&A if folks have any additional questions they want to kick to our panelists. And so I'll wait a minute or two to see if anything comes up there. And if not, we'll just give everyone back a few minutes in their day, which is never a bad thing.
I'll add one point. Oh, before you get, if you have a question while you're waiting, but I'll add one point on the management side is also learn from your previous managers, what you like, what you don't like. I think I meant to say that, but all of us have had bad ones and good ones. And I think you take, you learn from that and be conscious about what the habits that you don't want to pick up.
We do have a question, which is the question is there any advice that you haven't given us already? And I think a good twist on that too would be, is there anything you'd tell a, junior lawyer, or not even junior lawyer, a lawyer interested in getting to the GC seat, that you haven't mentioned today?
I'll add one thing, networking. I mean, ultimately, some of the jobs I've gotten have been a result of networking. And I know a lot of other people that the same thing is true. So never underestimate the power of networking with others. Those personal relationships drive a lot of hiring decisions, can drive promotion decisions even, but just on the hiring side. So opportunities that you might be interested in, there's a good chance you'll find that there are more of those if you're able to create good relationships with others through networking.
Yeah, I'll second that. Not as a GC, just in general. I remember when I was before law school, I had this idea that I wanted to be someone who was known for, called on for what I knew, not who I knew. That as I've moved in my career, I've sort of evened that out. And if anything, I've now shifted in the direction where I've learned, who you know can open up a lot of doors. It can open up your own worldview. It can open up your mind, and it can open up opportunities. And so being intentional about that, meeting people, staying in touch, being helpful can take you really, really far. And I've seen now in the last year and a half of my role, that's just as true in-house as it is anywhere else. We do have another question, which is, and I'll kick it to anyone who might want to answer. Talk about your greatest success or greatest failure in your career.
I could jump in with that one, and it's related to both of those. My greatest success and my greatest failure are jobs or roles that I wanted. So my greatest success is I was originally in DC and then moved back to Tampa after my partner got a job in Tampa. And I was looking for a job, and it was very, very difficult to find a job at the time. And I found a job at Baker McKenzie's Tampa Center that I thought was perfect. And I applied, got rejected, and I reached out to my law school career development. I reached out to people that I knew at Baker and just kind of worked the network, like everyone said, and submitted my resume about 2 more times. And then I finally got an interview and was hired on, which was very rewarding. And I think that's where I developed a lot in my understanding of legal operations and legal project management, and it helped increase my network even more. So being able to work my network to get a job that I was initially rejected for was just a great success. And greatest failure is kind of, I don't know that I would view this as a failure because it led to something good. But at the time, there was another job that, again, I thought was perfect for me. And the same thing, I worked my network and thought, oh, yeah, I'm definitely going to get this the same way that I got that other job. And it didn't end up working. And it felt very much like a failure. But now that I'm reflecting back on it, it was just another stepping stone in my career and a learning opportunity for me that, that wasn't the right opportunity and other things will come along. So yeah, it was disappointing and seemed very much like a failure, but you learn from your failures. And I think I was able to move on to a role that is now perfect for me.
Cool. I think we've exhausted the Q&A. I know we've exhausted the panelists by talking about a whole lot of really good advice and tips and tricks and lessons learned. So I want to thank all three of you for giving your time today. I know you're all very busy, and so I'm very grateful, and I know our panelists are as well. And Amy, I'll kick it to you for any closing thoughts.
Thanks so much, Kyle. I also want to thank our panelists, George, Reshma, Steve. This was wonderful. Kyle, you did a wonderful job of leading the discussion. So thank you for that. And thank you all for joining us. And also thank you to Latitude Legal for partnering with us on this. It's always fun to collaborate. And the recording will be available on YouTube in the next few days. So if there's anything you want to go over again, it's the Legal Mentor Network. We have our own page and you'll find it there. And thanks everyone again, and hope you all have a great day. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.